everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every week, photographers meet here to connect, inspire, and create. If you'd like to join us live, you'll find the schedule for upcoming sessions on my website at lindanickell.com, as well as the links to previous sessions posted to the Happiness Hour YouTube channel. Every Wednesday, my guests share their photography tips and insight into their creative journeys. They inspire us to try something new and look at a subject a little differently. Tonight's guest is Tom Schwabel. Tom is a travel and landscape photographer based in Portland, Oregon. His extensive travels have taken him to all 7 continents, allowing him to photograph vulnerable destinations and natural phenomena that inspires conservation in these places. Tom's clients and publication credits include the National Parks Conservation Association, Microsoft, Moon Guides, and National Geographic, and that's just naming a few. But in tonight's presentation, he's going to introduce us to something a little different that you won't see on his Instagram feed or maybe even his website yet. But his presentation is called Astrophotography, the big picture to the distant details. Tom will share his thoughts on photographing the night sky, from grand nighttime landscapes with stars and aurora borealis to the ever-fascinating deep space galaxies. If you're on Instagram, you can find Tom at tomschwabel photography, and you can connect with him through his website, linktr.ee/tomschwabel. I will post those links to the show notes on this video. Tom, welcome to the Happiness Hour.
Well, thank you for having me.
I am excited having you. So you and I spoke just a little bit before we got started, and I could not figure out how I found you. And I think I found you through LinkedIn because and you maybe can back up that we think that maybe you've posted something on a photography group page, and I saw it, and the stalker that I am, I followed you to Instagram, and then that led me to your website, and then I found you on Vero. So you're all over the place. And so I thought, I'm just going to ask you, because I don't know you, and I don't know anybody that knows you. But I thought, let me just blind call him and ask him if he'd do a presentation. And I was delighted that you said yes. So thank you. I think the bulk of your photography business is with travel. Portfolio is your money maker, but I know I skimmed, so if I skip something, please feel free to take this opportunity to introduce yourself to us and fill in something that I might have missed.
No, I think you've done a pretty good job so far. So
yeah, good stalker. All right. Well, if you are ready to get into your presentation, the screen is yours.
Anyways, so as Linda mentioned, I'm Tom Schwabel, and when Linda asked me to if I would be interested in doing a presentation, I thought about it for a while, and I've given presentations before to photography clubs and things like that. And in the past, they've always been about travel or landscapes and travel. And I thought about it, and I was kind of like, well, I could do that, but maybe I want to do something different this time. And I feel like a lot of times people have travel photography presentations, and it's just kind of more, here's a whole bunch of pretty pictures and all the pretty places I've been. But I really wanted to make something where people got to maybe learn something that they can take away and maybe apply or try out in the future. And so during COVID, obviously, there wasn't a lot of travel happening. So I spent a good amount of time exploring my great state of Oregon. And much of the eastern part of the state is very dark. And I had been inspired by some fellow photographers on Instagram and other places who, again, like me, are probably not so much known for astrophotography as other things. But I wanted to kind of try some things out. So it became a pet project of mine to try out some more interesting things about astrophotography. So the presentation tonight, we are going to, hopefully if this goes down, we're gonna start with some of the more basic things that probably a lot of you are already familiar with. You know, your basic star trails in your Milky Way. We're going to talk about photographing the aurora a little bit, and we're going to talk about eclipses. And you know, I know there just was an eclipse in the U.S. It was an annular eclipse. There's going to be a total eclipse next April, which I believe does go through Texas, a lot of Texas. And then we're going to dive into something a little bit more different that maybe people haven't been exposed to, and that's deep space. And really, what I was amazed to find out is what you can actually photograph that's deep space that I always thought, oh, you need a telescope for that. There's no way you're going to be able to see those things. So that's kind of the outline of what I'm going to talk about. And so I guess we're just going to dive right in. All right, so and you know, some of this is going to follow my journey as I've gotten more and more complicated and explored deeper into the realm of photographing things, especially at night. But let's just start with star trails. And I suspect a lot of you have done these, but maybe some of you haven't. It's really the simplest night photography technique. You don't need a lot of special equipment for it. You don't even really need a fancy camera for it. Any landscape that you can find that is, well, and I guess everybody here's in the northern hemisphere, but generally I like shooting star trails when I'm facing north. Because all of the stars, as the night goes on, rotate around Polaris up in the north. So you can get these kind of nice streaks that go in circles. And so this one here is a pretty simple one that was done in Mount Rainier National Park several years ago. I believe this was about a 25-minute exposure. It was a low ISO. So again, you don't need a fancy camera to do this. You know, pretty much any camera will do. This is probably ISO 200. And what I always love doing, even at night, if I can find a reflection and stick it in my photo, I'll do that. And this photo here was taken at Reflection Lakes, which is a fairly popular spot in Mount Rainier National Park that looks up on the mountain itself, and as you can see, pretty much does face north. And on this particular night, I had, I don't know, probably about a 10 to 20% moon low on the horizon. And so that actually lit up the landscape very nicely for me. It almost, you know, you get to see all the colors of the trees, and the sky has a little bit of blue in it. So yeah, that's, I think, a great thing to do, especially when there's a little moon in the sky and it's not quite dark enough to do the Milky Way, is just do some star trails. So moving on from that, the Milky Way. So Milky Way season in the northern hemisphere tends to be mostly in the summer. That's when the brighter parts of the Milky Way are visible above our horizon. If you happen to live in the southern hemisphere, and I will show some pictures from the southern hemisphere of the Milky Way, you see a heck of a lot more of it down there, just because the brighter parts are in the south. The trick with Milky Way photos is, of course, getting your stars to look like points. And there is the conventional wisdom, which is that your exposure time has to be about 500 over your focal length. So for a shot like this, which was shot at 24 millimeters, that equates to about, I think, a 20 to 24 second exposure length. And of course, when it's that when it's that dark out, and to see the Milky Way, you really don't want any moon in the sky. So you really need to be either a new moon or at least some night when the moon hasn't risen or is already set. You're going to be a pretty high ISO. So this one here, I believe, was probably ISO 3200, might have been 6400. And I think it was shot with a D800. So this is a few years old. I'm using a D850 now. Today's higher resolution cameras, honestly, that conventional wisdom is kind of starting to fall apart. If you were on a 45 or 60 megapixel camera, you might want to keep your exposure length down to, maybe 15 seconds, 20 tops at 24 millimeters. But anyways, this is a shot in the spring of Mount Hood, which is our iconic, some people kind of like to call it kind of the Mount Fuji of the Pacific Northwest, but it's our mountain here in Oregon. And this was shot at Lost Lake on a very hot evening, which meant usually when it's really hot, there's usually no wind and a clear sky. So I was able to get the nice reflection on the lake here. I got a little more complicated here. So this image here was shot in the Southern Hemisphere. This was shot in the Kalahari Desert of Namibia. I spent about 2 weeks in Namibia. I've been a number of places, but I would say Namibia had the darkest skies I've ever seen anywhere. You could see stars pretty much clear down to the horizon in every direction. This particular location was, I think, about 150 kilometers south of the capital city of Windhoek. The nearest town, which is a strong word, was about 5 kilometers away and was basically a gas station and maybe like 3 houses. So when I originally went out to shoot this, I wasn't thinking to do a panorama, but then I realized, I can't quite fit the whole Milky Way. I really wanted to capture the whole thing as it arced across the sky. And I also wanted to capture the two things that you can't see in the Northern Hemisphere, which are the Magellanic Clouds. Those are only visible in the Southern Hemisphere. They're the two kind of bright spots here. This one actually has a nebula inside it. If you were to kind of zoom in on the full-size version of this, you'd start to see a little more detail of that. But they're actually kind of, I think, satellite galaxies of the Milky Way or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but I wanted to capture all of that. So I ended up doing, the usual things for, taking a Milky Way shot. I think these were all about 20-second exposures, but I ended up doing a series of vertical exposures like you normally shoot a panorama. But I had to do them in quick succession because the stars are moving. And of course, when I try and go to stitch this thing together, if the stars have moved a lot between the frames, it's hard to get everything to line up. So this was a fun thing to play with in Photoshop. But one thing I did do is I did make sure that I had this nice acacia tree that I used as the foreground. And I decided, well, I've got this weird light pollution from that gas station about 5 kilometers away. Why don't I stick it behind the tree and kind of use it to make a bit of a silhouette? And I think it worked really well here. Again, the stitching was definitely a challenge. Because the stars did move slightly between the frames, even though I tried to, kind of shoot across the scene in fairly quick succession. And the other thing that I kind of had to deal with is a bit of vignetting. I mean, I was shooting wide open. I believe this was all shot at f1.4. So a very fast lens, pretty much wide open. So it did have some vignetting, which took a lot of tinkering with to blend out. But in the end, I was happy with the result. And I mean, a lot of photos have interesting stories. This one definitely did. Of course, while I was shooting this, as I'm futzing around in the dark, I see something scurrying around on the ground and turn on the flashlight, and it turns out it's this big giant scorpion that was about 6 inches long if you stretched him out. I took a picture of it and took a little video of it. I showed it to our nature guide the next morning. He was like, "Wow, you just found one of Namibia or one of Africa's deadliest scorpions." Apparently, I did a little reading. This particular species does kill many people every year. Not only because it's venomous, but because it's one of the few species of scorpion that actively hunts at night. So it's actually wandering around looking for food. So fun little story there. But yeah, that's the panorama. Okay, so the next thing, and I will never get tired of this, is the aurora borealis. And unfortunately for you folks in Texas, this probably doesn't happen very often down there, but we'll talk about it anyways. So the biggest thing for aurora borealis, for anybody who's not familiar, is you need to have a solar storm. Or you need to have an active sun. And I'm sure many of you know the sun runs in 11-year cycles, sunspot cycle. We are currently nearing the peak. I think the peak of the current cycle is predicted to be in 2024. The sun has been quite active this year. But when the sun is active, it tends to burp out a whole bunch of charged particles and other things that hit our Earth's magnetic field and interact in different ways. And that creates geomagnetic activity or geomagnetic storms. And the way we measure the strength of a geomagnetic storm is kind of like, no different than hurricanes or tornadoes. There's a scale. In this particular case, it's called the KP index, or the planetary K index. The higher the number, the more auroral activity there is. The scale is from 0 to 9. And they are able to forecast it with some degree of accuracy about 1 to 3 days in advance, because they can see the eruptions on the sun, which travel at the speed of light, but the charged particles themselves take a few days to show up at the Earth. There's one particular website that I use. I also do some ham radio things, so it's useful for that too. Spaceweather.com, I think, is a good source. It has links to the NOAA, so the National Weather Service has a space weather forecasting center. You can get a number of apps that'll predict for you when the KP is predicted to be high. But in the table here, I've kind of listed, just to give you an idea of the figure in the table here shows you kind of an idea of how common some of the more severe storms are and how far down the visibility of the northern lights can be. Unfortunately, in Texas, you're a little far south even for the biggest storms. But here where we are in Oregon, probably about 200 days a year, 200 days per solar cycle. So every 11 years, the KP does cross the 7 threshold, which means we would be able to see aurora in Oregon. A lot of those days here happen to be cloudy, but anyways, it's good to be prepared for this. So, I have an app on my phone, and if I happen to get an alert or see something on space weather that tells me that a high KP index is predicted, and that number is high enough, I might, venture out if the weather is forecast to be clear and see what I can find. But for most people, depending on a solar storm to actually reach where you live is not probably something you can depend on. So I have done a few trips to do the Northern Lights in Iceland and in Alaska, interior Alaska near Fairbanks. And the photos I'm showing here actually are from, these are all from Iceland. Actually, the photo on the left is the famous Diamond Beach, Jökulsárlón Lagoon. There's a lagoon associated with it that I think is maybe even photographed more than the Diamond Beach, but these are all the icebergs that wash up after they calve off the glacier. But anyways, photographing the aurora, aurora can be pretty active sometimes. It can move pretty fast. So all of these exposures here were about 10 seconds or less, all shot at about f2 to f2.8, all ISO 800 to 1600. The aurora tends to be very faint. So any amount of moonlight, unless it's a very strong aurora, is likely to wash it out. So it's better to go on a kind of a minimal or no moonlight day if you can. I think the KP index for all these was around 3, which for Iceland latitude is pretty favorable for the aurora. But especially in that last one over there, I mean, the aurora does come in fits and spurts throughout the night. It got very active for about a 20-minute period, and it was pretty vigorously dancing in that image there on the right. I think that was probably even maybe an 8-second exposure as it was dancing and reflecting in the lagoon there. So,
Tom, do you mind if I slip in a question while you're
yeah.
talking? Jamie's wondering to know, do you tend to shoot bulb for aurora so that you don't blur out the entirety of the?
So generally when I shoot the night sky, I am shooting mirror lockup. If I am shooting kind of single exposure type things like the aurora, I'm probably still going to be using the in-camera timer, but it's going to be set to whatever I think my exposure time might need to be. Fortunately, the aurora, I mean, it can change, but it tends not to change so quickly that you can't fine tune and make adjustments in your exposure length as you go along. But definitely mirror lockup so that, when that mirror flips up, and I suppose if you're on mirrorless, maybe this doesn't matter, but, just to give everything time to settle. But, the types of shutter speeds for aurora are going to be fast enough that, they're going to be under that 500 over focal length rule in general. So your stars are generally going to be nice and sharp. I don't know if that answers the question.
Let's say it did, and if it didn't, Jamie, come back in. Thanks.
Yeah. And I'll talk as I get deeper into this presentation. So all these were single exposure. When you're shooting wide open like this, you do have the limitation that, if I want my stars to be nice, sharp points of light, and I'm going to talk about an interesting way to focus later on, but if you want your stars to be nice, sharp points of light, and you're pretty wide open, unfortunately, that means your foreground is, maybe going to be a little out of focus with that shallow depth of field. And so these I shot with one exposure, but if I had to do over again and again, we'll talk about this a bit more later, I would actually shoot multiple exposures and blend them so that the foreground isn't really moving much. I can shoot that at a longer shutter speed. I can stop down a little bit so I can get a little bit more depth of field, do an equivalent exposure, and then blend the two. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a future slide. So this is that mythical low latitude aurora that almost never happens, or you're never lucky enough to catch it. This was in Oregon. I think I've seen the aurora maybe twice in Oregon. This event was a KP8 plus. It was almost a KP9. So it was probably about maybe 10 days per solar cycle that you get a strong enough activity like this. And this is Mount Hood here reflecting in Trillium Lake. Fortunately, it was in the summer when it wasn't cloudy. And fortunately, the lake was relatively calm. So I was able to get that nice reflection of the stars. Okay, I had to include this photo, and it's a little bit random, but it's probably was one of my better known photos. But it had some interesting technique here. So this is a pair of baobab trees. This was in our camp in Tanzania. I was in safari there a number of years ago. And there were these wonderful trees that were just in our camp. And we wanted to shoot these trees with some stars, but unfortunately, when we were in this camp with these trees, we had a full moon. So, doing the Milky Way or, anything like that just wasn't going to work out. So we decided to just shoot the trees and include the moon in the scene. And the front of the trees was lit up a bit by the camp, and there was a campfire nearby. But we kind of wanted to add a bit of a different look to it, maybe make it a bit spooky or eerie. So what we did is we had some speedlights. And this is a 60, I believe this was either a 30 or 60-second exposure. If you look really closely, these stars do have a tiny bit of streaking in them. And we had somebody stand behind the trees and pop the flash. And then while we were still exposing, run behind the other tree and pop the flash. And we had to do this several times before we actually got it right, where, the flash was completely behind the tree and we didn't accidentally have, a flash coming straight at the camera. And so we finally ended up with this result. And this photo actually was one of the ones that was published in National Geographic many years ago, which part of the reason why I felt like I had to include it, in addition to kind of talking about the, just the creative idea here to just kind of take the moonlight and kind of build on it. Of course, this photo had a story with it too. We had a Tanzanian army. He was basically a kid. He was probably not even 17. But he was guarding the camp with his AK-47. And as we were taking these shots, he came over and he insisted, he's like, it's not safe. You've got to go in. You've got to go in your tent now. It's not safe. And I'm just kind of looking over and I'm like, my tent is just over there. Like, it's only 100 feet away. Like, why are you telling me I have to go in and it's not safe out? And of course, I find out the next morning, because I'm kind of a late riser, I come into the dining tent a little late and there's this buzz, this energy in the dining tent. And everybody's talking about, did you hear that we had lions in our camp last night? I was like, no, I didn't hear that. But yeah, we were out there apparently with the lions taking photos. So anyways, that's a little bit of a fun one there. Of course, comets. This was Comet Neowise, again, from our favorite mountain viewing location in Oregon, Trillium Lake, with a wonderfully calm night. But I think a full moon. And the problem with comets is they tend to be visible only right around sunrise or sunset. So the sky already had some color in it. So the stars are a little washed out, but kind of the standard rules for photographing the Milky Way kind of applied there. All right. Now, I did see on your agenda that you're going to have somebody coming in doing Eclipse 101. So this will be the Eclipse, I don't know, let's call it point 101. So this, we had a solar eclipse, the Great American Solar Eclipse, I guess, if you will, that went across the country in 2017. And so, months, people, myself included, spent months kind of planning for this. And, it was easy for me. I mean, I was, 100 miles from the path of totality at most, maybe. But we decided to go out to the Dalles, Oregon, Madras, Oregon, which is on the center line, and it's where NASA set up their stuff, and do the eclipse there. So I had two camera bodies running for that one. I did kind of a time lapse with the wide angle lens. I didn't have a great foreground. The sun was pretty high in the sky, but I got some trees there in a multiple exposure, just kind of showing the arc of the sun as the eclipse progressed. And then I did a composite with a 500 millimeter telephoto lens. The company called Thousand Oaks Optical makes, I think, wonderful solar filters. You probably want to start picking those up now for next year's solar eclipse, because I bet they're going to sell out. But basically photograph the whole eclipse with the solar filter on, except when the sun is in its totality phase. That's when you rip that filter off. And you'll find that there's a huge dynamic range even at totality, because you have the corona, which you want to kind of photograph all the streaming things coming away from the sun. But you also can have eruptions from the sun, almost like fire, if you will, called prominences. And if you kind of look in on the zoomed in version there, you can see, kind of a bright reddish eruption from the sun right there. But the dynamic range for that is huge. So bracketed, and then there was some blending to kind of recover that dynamic range in Photoshop for the totality. Anyways, there's a great website by a guy who works for NASA, who I think is nicknamed Mr. Eclipse. That's where I found a lot of useful information. I would suggest checking that site out, get some more information there.
Can I, Tom? Let me
Yeah.
go on. Let me slip in a real quick question before I lose it. Darlene wants to know, should you have a solar filter on the whole for the whole eclipse?
If it is an annular eclipse, yes. So an annular eclipse is when the moon is not big enough to cover the entire sun. So that's the type of eclipse that just happened a few weeks ago. But in a total eclipse, you do want to remove that solar filter once the sun is entirely covered up by the moon, because that solar filter is equivalent to about 10 stops, at least 10 stops of blocking. So, if you want to see those details of the prominences and all that, you can't have the solar filter on. I mean, if you did, your exposure lengths would be so long that, especially at 500 millimeters, unless you retract, you wouldn't get any details. So,
let me just ask another one since I've already interrupted. Jamie's curious, did you use a tracker to keep the telephoto on the sun?
No. For that, you didn't really need to, because, I mean, if we go back and look at the types of exposures here, there's no need for a tracker. Those were all pretty fast exposures. And they need to be, especially, 500 millimeters, they do need to be fairly fast with auto tracking. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yes.
Anyways, the next fun thing is, so during COVID, I had these solar filters lying around, and I was like, well, okay, what can I do? This is where I started to get a little bit more adventurous and dig a little deeper. And I learned that there's actually a website where you can go that allows you to calculate where you can stand at what time to be able to see different objects pass in front of the sun, like the International Space Station. So this was a fun little experiment that I did in 2020. These passes are very quick, so you have to have a very accurate clock for this. The entire time that the International Space Station transited the sun here, and you can kind of see a bigger version there. It looks like a little TIE fighter with the solar panels, was 1 second. And so I was shooting at 8 frames a second, so I think I got eight frames of the ISS crossing the sun. And then, of course, there's a fun little, that's not dust, that's actually a sunspot over there. So you can do this with the sun. The same website will actually allow you to do it with the moon. I haven't tried that one yet, but at some point I will try that. And of course, if you're really creative, for the eclipse next year, you figure out a place where you can stand during the eclipse when the ISS is crossing in front of the sun as well. So I don't know if I'll try that. It's definitely an idea I have in mind, but we'll see.
And that was Transit Finder, right? Was that?
Yes, it was, I think, transit-finder.com.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, so we've talked about a lot of things, especially, and I mentioned a few things here. A lot of other things I've showed so far have all been single exposure, and especially when we're dealing with the Milky Way or high ISO or shallow depth of field. There's a bunch of challenges that kind of get in the way. Noise being the biggest one. So we'll talk a little bit about how to reduce noise. The depth of field being another one. And then, if you're shooting the Milky Way, the foreground can be very dark because, you can't really have much light or much moonlight available to light up your foreground. So all of these things kind of give rise to the idea that, well, we need to do some sort of blending. And so I've got a nifty example here of, this is Mount Rainier, in Mount Rainier National Park up in Washington. And so what I did here is I attempted to solve all those problems in that previous slide at once. And so, the problem being here that, the landscape, the mountain was kind of dark. Didn't have a lot of, contrast or shadows or interesting detail in the dark sky. If I shot just one exposure of the Milky Way, it would be very noisy. I could extract more detail if I stacked them. So what I did here is I took many exposures of the Milky Way. I think probably a dozen to maybe 18 exposures. And I loaded them into a star stacking program. And we're going to talk more about this later. In this case, it was a program called Sequator, and basically stacked them to reduce the noise. And then blended that with an exposure taken in the exact same place, never moved the tripod, never did anything, but that was taken still during twilight. So in this case, about an hour after sunset. and blended those two together so that I could get, more definition in the foreground, maybe even a few shadows, a little bit of interesting light. And then combined that with a Milky Way that has more detail and lower noise. And so this stacking approach is something as we start talking about deep space objects is going to be crucial. The ability to take multiple exposures, stack them together, and basically average out the noise. And so that's where we ended up. I had done all this, and then it was, you know what, I want to do something more. And so I called it Deep Space on a Budget. And so the objective here was to photograph deep space objects using mostly stuff I already had around, in my camera bag or around the house. So, the things I already had, well, I had the Nikon D850. It's a great camera for low light. It's got pretty good noise performance. The Nikkor 200 to 500 millimeter lens, which is my wildlife lens that kind of got repurposed for astrophotography. An interval timer, which I think most of us already have. A sturdy tripod. And I do mean sturdy because when you look at all the things we're going to stack on this tripod, between the tracker and the counterweight to balance the whole thing and the giant lens and the camera body, we're talking about more than 15 pounds of load. So those were the things I had. I skipped over the things I didn't have. So let's go back and talk about those. So a star tracker. So the one I use and the one that most of my friends have been using who have been doing this with me is made by a company called Ioptron. They make several different models. They make I think it's a Sky Tracker or something, which is a very lightweight device. The SkyGuider Pro is a bit more substantial device, and it can handle a max payload of 11 pounds with a counterweight to balance it. So that was going to be my tracking mechanism. So that was 450-ish bucks for that. A counterweight extension. So because this thing setup I have is so heavy, to balance it rather than putting more weight on the counterweight, it was better to just put the counterweight farther out from the tracker to, kind of extend that center of mass out a little further to balance it. A USB powered lens heat tape. So you're going to be doing, when you're doing this deep space astrophotography, you're probably going to be out many hours. And particularly if you're in a more humid environment, you're going to start to get condensation on that lens, just kind of like how dew forms overnight on things. So if you get this little, I bought mine on Amazon, about 20 bucks. Just power off a USB power pack and wrap that around the front of your lens. That'll keep the lens just warm enough that condensation doesn't develop over the course of the night. And the other thing that helps with the condensation is keeping that lens hood on. That'll help with the condensation as well. And then to do your alignment, I chose to use a nice powerful green laser pointer with a little handy dandy hands-free laser pointer holder. It basically allows me to point that laser pointer at a particular star that I'm trying to align to and just kind of hold it there while I'm getting everything, the camera, the tracker, everything lined up. So I think my total, and then the last new thing that I needed was something called a Batonov mask. And we'll talk more about that, but that allows you to do extremely precise focus. And you could even make one of those at home, but we'll talk about that. So this is the deep space astrophotography setup. And, I think if you total it up here, I probably spent about, I don't know, $600 to do this, so less than the price of a good lens. So I considered that to be kind of a win. So the first thing about deep space astrophotography is finding a dark location. Unfortunately, there's a nice website that a friend of mine told me about that I use called cleardarksky.com. And it basically tells you where the dark sky is on the map. And so you can see the city of Portland, where I'm sitting right now, is up there in that little red blob, and I'm actually sitting in the white blob, which means I'm pretty much off the scale. But there was a nice astrophotography location that we went to that was about a 3-hour drive from Portland that was in about the darkest sky. So I think a Bortle scale 1. So there's a scale for how they rate dark sky, and 1 is very good. And so that's where we did our astrophotography. But you can go to this website and figure out where are good spots to go do this on the map. So once you've done all this and you've gone to your spot, the next thing you need to do is figure out, well, what do I want to take a picture of? And I think one of the most important concepts here is angular size. So that is basically relatively how big in your viewfinder is an object. And at least for a full frame camera at 500 millimeters, your field of view is about 4.1 by 2.7 degrees. And then I've listed here some common objects that people might think of photographing. So the Andromeda Galaxy, believe it or not, is 3.18 degrees. So that is going to fill a pretty good portion of your frame. The Orion Nebula, 1.83 degrees, on down to I know everybody would love to photograph a planet. Well, you can see there Saturn is only 0.013 degrees. And so I actually have taken a 500 millimeters full frame, not cropped. That's what Saturn looks like. It's about 20 pixels tall, but you can tell there's rings there. You can make out the rings, but not really a great target. So ideal objects are going to be nebulas and galaxies, which interestingly enough, a lot of these are not typically visible to the naked eye. But like so many things, when you take a long exposure with the camera, all of a sudden things that you didn't realize were there pop out. So in terms of, objects, figuring out which things, obviously things to keep in mind, a lot of objects are seasonal. The Andromeda Galaxy is going to be in your summer. The Orion Nebula is going to be in the winter. I think these are fantastic first objects to go after because they're fairly bright, fairly big. But in order to find all these things, I think it pays to, spend a little time learning the major constellations in the sky, because those are going to be kind of your map to figure out where things are, especially when you start looking for dimmer and dimmer objects that are, just not going to be obvious to find at all. There's a bunch of great apps out there that'll help you figure out where things are in the sky. I'm sure a lot of landscape photographers are probably familiar with photopills. That's great for, just kind of locating the Milky Way in general, knowing where the sun and the moon are. For more deeper space objects, Stellarium is a great app. It allows you to kind of visualize where those deep space objects are in the sky, and also can give you a perspective of how big they're going to be when you try and photograph them. You can actually visualize objects, at 500 millimeters or, 200 millimeters or whatever. Skyview is an app that I have on my phone. It's a great little app. You just hold it up and look around in the sky, and you can identify a lot of constellations and a few good objects to photograph. And then books. So, the place where we went for dark sky didn't really have any internet. So having a good sky watching book, I think, is a great resource. I found this particular one that I listed here to be a pretty good one for, kind of beginning astrophotography to kind of get some ideas. So you have your whole, you get your whole setup, your camera and all your stuff mounted on your tracker. And the first thing that you need to do is line everything up to Polaris. So fortunately, I think everybody here on this call is in the Northern Hemisphere. So that makes life much easier because there is a star that actually is at almost true north, but it's not exactly true north. So when you're using one of these trackers, it has a scope in it. You'll have to look through, and it's going to have these little graduations, kind of like a clock on it. And then you can get an app on your phone that basically, based on the current time of day and your latitude, longitude, whatever, is going to tell you where on that scope you need to put Polaris at that particular time. And if you've done your alignment right, Polaris is just going to rotate around this little scope as the night goes on and hopefully stay on that little track. But when you're photographing something at 500 millimeters, you need your alignment to be pretty accurate. So you do need to do this pretty carefully. And it can be a little cumbersome because the setup is kind of heavy. But, again, as I mentioned, I use that green laser pointer to basically point it at Polaris. So as I'm doing my alignment with that scope, I know that I'm actually looking at the correct star as I'm doing that alignment. But even with this, even if you've done really good alignment, it's not perfect. So you're going to have to do shorter exposures, especially at those longer focal lengths, just because you're not going to get it perfect. And you, longer exposures, you're going to start to see a little drift and streaking. But yeah, that's polar alignment. So then you've got to get your camera focused. And just doing the, live view eyeball focus isn't really good enough, especially when you're at 500 millimeters trying to look at something in some amount of detail. At least for northern lights, auroras, things like that, I'll do a live view focus where I'll basically find a bright star, zoom into 100% and do that kind of manual focus. That's not going to be good enough here because, if you think about it, in your lens, all those colors, they're not maybe going to focus at quite exactly the same point. There might be some chromatic aberration. There might be some scintillation in the air. It's going to be hard to tell that you're actually focused. So there's this clever invention called the Batonov mask. And it basically creates a diffraction pattern. So when you're focusing, you stick this in front of your lens. It's going to create a diffraction pattern that when you are perfectly focused is going to be symmetrical. If you are even the slightest bit out of focus, you are going to see these, one line here is not going to be in the middle. It's going to move up and down as you're focusing. But when you get that right in the middle, you're going to be perfectly focused. So then, you've got everything lined up. You've got yourself focused. Hopefully you've found your object. You're going to want to do many exposures, and you're going to want to do several different types of exposures. The objective of all of what we're doing here is to improve the signal to noise ratio by averaging over many exposures. So in the example here, I have a picture of the Heart and Soul Nebula. Again, taken at 500 millimeters. The total exposure time for this was 54 minutes, but it was done in 60-second exposures, 54 of them. And you can look at some of them here, and you can hardly tell there's anything there. There's like a bit of a smudge. There's something there, but it's not much. And if you looked at this at 100%, it's horribly noisy. You wouldn't never want to print it or do anything with it. Because I think these were shot at probably ISO 12,800 or thereabouts. But anyways, the general idea is the more exposure time is always better. Less noise, and the less noise, the more details you're able to pull out. of faint objects, and you just see more detail. And so you have your light frames. And so these are going to be the frames that are going to be doing most of the work for you, that actually have the image in them. They all need to be the same exposure time, exactly the same. You want your in-camera noise reduction off when you're doing this, because we're doing the stacking to reduce the noise. If you turn on the in-camera noise reduction when you're doing this, you're going to noise reduce out all those minute, faint details that you're trying to pull out by doing the stacking. So those are your light frames. You're also going to want to do, after you've taken your light frames, for however long you can stand outside and do this, you're going to want to do some dark frames. And basically, dark frame is you just put the lens cap on. Same exposure time in ISO as those light frames. The idea here is you are profiling the characteristics of your camera's noise. So all those hot pixels and just all that random noise that's in your camera sensor, you want to create a profile of that. And so your stacking software is going to be able to take that profile and basically subtract that stuff out. But it's critical that you do that under the exact same conditions as the light frames. And that includes temperature, because the noise of your camera sensor is a function of temperature. And generally speaking, you're going to get lower noise the colder it is. That's just the way silicon works. Then optionally, and I haven't done too much with this, you can take flat or vignette frames. And you can see here that this is a very low contrast image. And you're going to be stacking this together to kind of integrate or amplify the signal to noise ratio. And if you have any vignetting, you're going to kind of amplify that too. So you can take some frames, and these are actually taken during the daylight with something opaque over your lens to just kind of profile the light falling on your sensor and kind of how it falls off, especially around the edges. And that needs to be the same aperture, same ISO, ideally the same focal length, but it doesn't have to be the same shutter speed or anything like that. You're just profiling how the light is falling off the sensor. So you take all those, you end up with a hard drive full of images, and then you get home and you have to work through all this. And so the first thing is you're going to take your raw files and you're going to do some minimal adjustments to them. Really pretty minimal, because again, you want the stacking software to do all the work for you of bringing out those details and removing that noise. So when I do the raw processing, it's basically just doing some white balancing, make sure that those stars kind of sky color looks acceptable. No noise reduction in software either, just like in the camera, no noise reduction. And export those as TIFFs. And then we're going to pull that into the stacking software. And I'm not going to go through the stacking software in any detail here. There's plenty of tutorials on that. And there's several different types of software. The three most popular ones I've listed here, I've tried two of them because I have Windows. I have not tried this third one because it's a Mac program. But the programs have places where you load in all your light frames, all your dark frames, all your bias or vignette frames in little groups. And then the software is going to go off and potentially take minutes or hours to align all those frames, line up all those stars, do that integration, and ultimately spit out a shiny new TIFF file for you that's hopefully low noise with a lot more detail. And And then once you have that, and by the way, some of these stacking programs are actually capable of consuming raw files. If you're a Canon user, I think you might be more in luck than a Nikon user with that. But my workflow has just been to export TIFFs, but whatever. Once you're done with that, you have this TIFF file. It's probably going to look a little flat. You can pull that into Photoshop, and that's just where you're doing your usual finishing type things, maybe increasing the contrast, doing some color adjustment, saturation, maybe a little dodging and burning, whatever needs to be done. That's kind of your finishing. So just some results here, just to give you an example of some of the things, I never thought you could do just with a camera. I always thought you needed a telescope to do this. So this is our nearest galaxy neighbor, the Andromeda Galaxy. I could probably do a lot better, but I'm still on the beginning parts of my journey. People can go pretty nuts with this, but this was a 36-minute total exposure here. You can see some of the dust lanes here and two satellite galaxies. These are actually other galaxies here. If I were to do, again, get even more exposures and stack even more frames, I could pull out even way more detail than you can see here. But this was a start. This one I really thought was pretty cool just because of the colors and kind of the shapes. This is the Orion Nebula. Orion Nebula is actually pretty bright. This was only 20 minutes of total exposure time. But I was pretty happy with the amount of details you can kind of see in these dust clouds here and kind of the different colors that came out. I was a little surprised. And then there was actually this other nebula right here, which is called the Running Man Nebula. And if you look at it, the shadow kind of looks like a guy running. So, yeah. So this was another common thing. Again, more of a wintertime target. This is the Seven Sisters. You can actually see this in the sky. Sometimes it looks like a kind of a tiny Big Dipper. But when you actually photograph this at 500 millimeters and get a little exposure time on it, you can see there's actually a cloud of dust in front of it, and you can actually see some definition to that dust. And these stars, turns out they're fairly blue. So this was 25 minutes. Again, I mean, I could have spent hours and I would have had a lot more detail here, but I was just like, wow. You can do this with just, a pretty minimal outlay of additional equipment. This was a fainter object that is actually located in the Milky Way itself. This is the North American Nebula. You can kind of see this is the Gulf of Mexico right here. There's Florida, the Yucatan Peninsula. And this is 44 minutes of exposure time. But, you can tell, I mean, just look at all those stars. I mean, because this is in the Milky Way. Just a crazy amount of stars there. If you look at this at 100%, you'll just see just tons and tons of stars. But yeah, so that was about an hour. So I guess that's kind of about it. I just wanted to show a few examples, and I figured I'd end here with a more classic photo of mine. This was actually taken about 2 weeks ago. I just returned from Madagascar. So this is Avenue of the Baobabs in western Madagascar at sunset. But yeah, I just thought I'd share with you something a little different, and hopefully people got something a little different out of that, or at least inspired to know that wow, there's this whole other world out there that you actually can photograph without a telescope, just with your camera and a telephoto lens. So
that was a great presentation. Okay, so this is the first time I've actually seen a lot of deep space pictures all at one time. And it's like, okay, that's pretty cool because I know John Fisher's in this room, and I have another friend named Vineeth who they dabble into it. And so
Mhm.
it's kind of like, okay, the nerdy boys are here, but they are beautiful. And I guess I did not realize and did not appreciate the time that these guys are spending taking these shots when you were listing
Mhm.
we're in the 30-minute range of shots. I'm like, that's why
Yeah.
John Fisher drinks. Okay, so um
Well, and the other thing for me is I'm an engineer by trade during the day, so this was a way to blend photography with something more technical. And I kind of liked the technical aspects of it and just kind of learning, what you can really do that
yeah.
I didn't, that I didn't think was possible with such simple equipment. So
I'm going to ask you to take your screen down. I'm going to run through here. There's a question that I was a little slow on the catch before you moved from blending. So if I can, this is Michelle's question. She wants to know, have you ever used low level lighting of the landscape instead of a blue hour image?
um yes. I mean, I do have one of those LED light panels with the variable brightness and the very variable color temperature. Um, I've found that I don't really think I like the results so much because I mean, your subject would have to be fairly close. And if you think about like that picture of Mount Rainier, like I don't have a light big enough to light up Mount Rainier. I mean, I could light up some flowers in the foreground, but to really get a nice even look, I mean, I feel like trying to light paint the foreground is it's going to look like it was light painted. So no, I haven't really gone in that direction.
Okay. Fair enough. I'm scanning through here. I didn't see any other questions because I peppered them where they were kind of in under the right headings. So I want to thank you for coming and sharing. And um, because you said this is something that you normally wouldn't or don't do presentations on, would you do it again?
I mean, if people got something out of it, sure.
Oh,
So
that
I'm hoping that people, took away something from it. And that's again, I didn't want to just show a bunch of pretty travel pictures. I wanted to kind of have something with a little more substance. So
I can appreciate that. I gosh, I wish we could get the aurora here. I was in Iceland this summer. I know it's the wrong time, but the photos that you were showing, it's just like, dang it, I'm gonna have to go back. So you've got a beautiful portfolio, and I thank you for sharing a glimpse of them with us. And I appreciate you coming to talk to our group, especially because you don't even know us. So that was really, really generous of you. Um,
yeah, well, I'm glad to do it. And, I still managed to squeeze in a few travel photos here and there. So
oh, and I was loving it that the way you closed out with the Madagascar photo. That's just on that's real high on my wish list. So thank you.
it's definitely an interesting place.
And
It is unique.
I never asked you this. Are you leading workshops? Or are you just traveling with a bunch of friends or traveling solo? Or are you teaching?
No, I'm not doing any workshops. I for some things I do travel with a couple of other friends
Sure.
for some photo trips, usually more domestic. I mean, we have done Iceland and Canada. But some of these things I've also done a fair amount of networking with people.
Mhm.
I have contacts in Iceland. When I was just in Iceland this summer, I did some aerial photography in Iceland. So I was able to get some contacts with a pilot there to actually do a small plane open window flight over the south coast. So,
Okay.
but no, I don't lead any. I
Okay.
don't lead any workshops.
I didn't, if you did, I didn't want to skim over that opportunity to get you to share that information. So um, I just wanted to make sure. All right. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing. And I hope that our paths run across each other in real life one day. So,
Yeah,
all right.
for sure.
Yeah. All right. Next
All
week
right.
off. But please join us on November 8th for David Cook's presentation, The Evolution and Inspirations of a Nature Photographer. Until next time, go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.